In this lesson, I will be making some minor fixes to the banners on the portable stages, discussing the production pipeline for this project, setting up and rigging the lighting systems for this production, fine-tuning materials for the textured scene elements, and giving the proxy crowd some tones to help us visualize the final result. I'm going to start off this lesson by making some fixes to the banners that I noticed after the end of the last lesson. One of them is this jagged edge. You wouldn't have something like this with cloth, so instead of going back to ZBrush to fix it, I'm just going to fix it in Maya with the soft selection tool. So I'm gonna make sure I get nice straight edges. Try to keep it as straight as possible. Same thing here. Try to keep the vertex selections too. And here. On the other side is fine. I don't think there are any dips. Yeah, that one's fairly straight. Turned out pretty well. Alright, the next thing I want to do is create some fake ties or something that look like ties to make this thing not look like it's just floating in midair. So I'm going to create a polygon cylinder and I will send it over there. I'm going to use a network of primitives to fake some ties. And I can duplicate it for the other four. So it's going to be something like that. It'll be as if it's like a drawstring of pants, sort of like hollowed through a hole in the top, or it'll look like this is just draped over the string. I'm going to go to the local axis so that I can make modifications like this to it and extend it. And the other thing I'm going to use to fake a tie is a torus. So I'm going to create a polygon torus. It's going to look like it's tied to it. Just duplicate it and create something that makes it look like a tie. A knot. So right now I'm going to use the soft selection to simulate some type of tie-like deformation. And that should be enough. And now I just need a loose hanging part just to show that it's been wrapped around the and I'm going to scale these just a little bit larger so it can justify the thickness that we're seeing here. And then I'll add an edge loop here. And that should allow me to subdivide it and make it look appealing. 3. Looks like a tie. And I think I should, as a collective, make all of them larger. So I'm going to scale up just a little bit bigger to scale. All right, I'm going to transport it to the other sides. Just group all of it. Call this banner tie. Now we'll just duplicate this center pivot. Move it to the other side. Okay. Need to make sure that this is straight. It's reacting to gravity correctly. All right, so that's 2 ties on this side. Group this. Call it thin back banner ties. Duplicate this. This is seam front. And I can just take this center pivot and just take it to the other side. Rotate it. Minus 180 degrees and just adjust. Okay, that looks pretty good. So both of those are done. Put them with their respective portable stages. So this one is seam front, so it goes in there. And the other one, seam back. Alright, and I want to mention too that I changed the height of these banners. These banners were initially really high up so that their bottom side was close to the heads of these spectators, and I just moved them down because they look a lot better from the shot cams. Simplifies what's going on over here. Bottom of them were cutting off the heads and creating these weird tangents that just don't look so good. Next, I'm going to discuss the production pipeline I will be using to get this VFX intensive animated production into a final 4K cinematic video file. The file I'm working in right now is my source file. So it has my character rig and the background. That file is going to be split up into 2 different Maya files. One is going to be of the background as is right now with the proxy crowd and all the modeled elements. And the lights I'm about to create for the background are also going into this file, along with the stage lights on the outer part of the light truss. If you take a look at the light truss, these 3 in the center here are going to be illuminating the performer, but the ones on the outskirts here are going to be illuminating the crowd. So these lights on the outskirts go with the background into the background file. The character animation file will be split up into several different pieces right now based on the various different outfits that the character is going to be wearing. Thankfully, the breakup of the outfits is determined by shot cam. So there's 5 cameras, and for the first 4 cameras, the character has a different fit. For cameras 4 and 5, she has on the same fit. If you remember, I also have 3 spin cams, and I'm going to split them off into 2 different files. I have a certain configuration I want, and it's based on which ones are going to have the mesh cube effect from Latrice's performance in them. The next stage of this pipeline for the background is the mesh crowd. Once the crowd has been rigged and animated, it comes inside this background file as an alembic, and the proxy crowd is then replaced with the mesh crowd. So I'll be creating a mesh crowd in this background file. This will allow the background characters to interact with the environment a lot better. They are closest to it, so they should be in that file and receiving the correct lighting and interacting with the background. This is where the processing of this background stops. Once the mesh crowd is in there and I have them arranged and they're looking correct. So now we move back down to these character animation files. And the next thing to do is to send each and every one of these files, once the animation is done, to an nCloth simulation room, and that's where all the clothing are going to be simulated. Well, I actually won't be sending them to an nCloth simulation room. It's this very same file. I'm going to turn on all the nCloth nucleus nodes so that simulation can be completed. Once the nCloth is simulated over the animation, then the next thing to do is to cache it. So the nCloth simulation is saved to file, and from there, the finished result, the character animation and the finished cached nCloth animation is pushed out as an Alembic file. This is very important because this file by now will be really hefty. It has the rig, it has nCloth in it, and the next step is to simulate dynamic systems, and I'm not going to try to simulate dynamics in a file this hefty. So I need a nice clean Alembic file to send to the dynamic simulation file. So each of these 8 files are pushed out as 8 different Alembic files, and those Alembic files then go into separate Maya files where the dynamic simulations are going to take place. Those 8 files are going to be broken up into smaller files based on the various instances of dynamic simulations. So what I mean by that is if I have 2 Bifrost effects for a particular shot or a particular camera, I'm not going to do them in the same file because I think it's going to be too expensive. So every individual effect gets its own file, and this will make for a lighter file. So all I have to worry about is the Alembic and then the hefty dynamic simulation that's going to occur. And with the dynamic simulations, if I'm using Bifrost or Bifrost Arrow, I'm definitely going to have to cache it, right? Because it's a very expensive dynamic system. So it really simulates fairly slowly based off of what I've seen. That's why I want to keep the scenes as light as possible. And from the tests I have done, even the cache, once you cache it, that's still not enough to be able to scrub it comfortably. To be able to scrub it, I'm going to have to export that cached Bifrost as an Arnold stand-in, and then I'm going to have to bring the stand-in back into the dynamic simulations file and then apply the materials it needs. So this is going to be one of the more complex parts of this. The Alembic file comes in here, the Bifrost and Bifrost Arrow simulations are created, cached, and then pushed out as a stand-in and then brought back in. From here, the animation, the cloth, the dynamics is done, so it's time to light the character animation file. And what I do then is go back to my source file, grab all the lights in the center part of the truss that illuminate the character, and they go into the dynamic simulation file, and I do my lighting. At this stage, I'm going to be animating the lights too and doing all the fancy things that the theatrical lights are expected to do for each shot. Right, so dimming and just using the rig, the controls to move the lights and have them follow the character. A lot of that is going to happen here in this dynamic simulation file. So once the character lights are complete and they're illuminating correctly and they're animating correctly, the next step is to bring in an HDRI, which I'm going to use to get better reflections or more controlled reflections. I have to try as much as possible to make sure that the HDRI pick closely simulates the environment that I have here in this background. So once the HDRI is in and illuminating the character along with the character's lights, the shot is pretty much done, and it's time to send both the background and the finished character animation file with all the dynamics to my render farm service. So I've decided to use Rebus Farm, but I'm still doing some research on where to send these shots for rendering. So the render farm should give me back my 4K renders, and those 4K renders go into an After Effects visual composition. At this stage, I'll be doing everything to ensure that I create cohesion between the character animation file in the background. What I mostly have to worry about is lighting interaction. So when something is happening on the center stage of the character, if it has to impact the background characters, I'm going to be doing all that in After Effects with some fancy tricks. And if it comes down to it and I have to return to the Maya files and import certain things from the character animation file to the background or vice versa, just to get some more cohesive interaction, I will then take whatever new files I get from making these two files interact and bring them back into the visual comp to help make the finished render more cohesive. Right, so there's going to be a lot of tricks. I'm probably going to learn some new things as I assemble this visual composition. And the last step is to take the visual composition into another composition, and the music and the SFX is going to incorporate it into the visual comp, and that finished result will be rendered into the final cinematic video file. So this is going to be the pipeline, and I hope it doesn't get any more complicated than this, but it might, right? But for now, this is what I'm going to need to get this shot to completion. I'm going to start the lighting process by adding some low intensity lights on the wall of the studio. I've turned off a few elements, the hanging banners, the stage, and the flyers. They were all here. I just turned them off so I could focus on the back wall. And my render settings, I've picked a very low render settings, 960 by 540, and I'm going with a default render setting, so fairly low, so I can get some faster feedback. So the objective here is to go for something like this, right? I want lights that are like that right there, that just point downward, and I'm going to stack them, not this close, but they're going to be fairly spaced out. And the point is to ensure that these lights are always making the eye travel down into the composition. So if your eye ends up in the background there, right now it's very black, right? It's just pure black. I was testing this out with some mesh lights and it didn't work out too well, so I'm going to use regular lights now. I lowered the intensity of my sky dome so I can focus on the lights I'm about to create. So if I was to crank this up a little bit, the background is fairly plain, and if your eye ends up over here, I don't want it to go off the screen. All right, so I want to make sure that the illumination in the background just makes you look down. I'm going to lower the exposure of this sky dome light again so that I can focus on seeing how these wall lights are going to impact the background. So let me stop this for now, and I'm going to create a fake fixture. I shouldn't call it a fake fixture, but a very low resolution fixture, because it's all the way in the back. It doesn't really need to be of high quality, but it does need to be smoothed and clean so that when it shows up in the render, it doesn't have any faceting. So I'm going to start with a pipe, a polygon pipe, and I'm going to come over here to the channel editor and reduce its thickness. I'll move it up and scale it up some. I'm going to create a polygon cylinder that represents the cap. So this is just the cap to prevent the light from leaking up top, and also because the physical item should be sealed off at the top. So there it is, and I'm going to name it wall light cap. And quite frankly, to make things easier, because I'm going to duplicate so many of them, I'm just going to merge these two items into one. So I'll combine them into one mesh. So I'll go mesh, combine, and just delete history, freeze transforms, call it wall light main 01. I'm gonna change this name. It appears to be clashing with something. So, all right, so I'm gonna move this up, and it's definitely going to have to be large because it's a wall light. Not that size, make the same size as and I'm going to put a portal light in it. So I'm going to go lights, portal light. All right, so I'm going to get this portal light that I just created into its correct location in this little fixture. So I'm going to select the wall light I created, select the portal light, go into the animation menu, go constraint, point constraint. And this is just to get the light to the fixture, this little thing. So I'm going to make sure maintain offset is off and I hit apply. And that gets the light over there and I don't need the point constraint anymore. Actually, I could have also used mass transforms. It's over here somewhere, modify mass transformations. So that's actually the correct, simpler way to do it. Right, so get this portal light in here, rotate it minus 90 degrees. And there should be a setting in here to modify this portal light so it's a sphere. Actually, I might have the wrong light. I don't think it's the portal light I need. I need the area light because it has that option that I think I want. So I'm going to go Arnold Lights, Area Light, and I'm going to get it to location by selecting the area light, selecting the fixture, go modify, mass transforms, just do mass translation. And there it is. Scale it up, rotate it minus 90 degrees. And let me go see if I can find this. Yeah, light shape quad. And I can just say cylinder or disc. Yeah, I think the disc is what I'm looking for. So I can scale this up now inside the fixture. And I can delete this. All right, so now that it's in there, I'm going to parent it to this light object. And I'm going to see how it's working by moving it to the wall. I'm going to move it till it's really flush with the wall. I'm going to open my renderer and make sure I'm looking through perspective camera 1. So I'll make sure I might have to hit render first. Stop, and there it is. Go perspective camera 1. It's already selected it, but apparently it's not didn't update up here. So I'll hit play, and I'm going to start cranking up my light exposure and intensity. Go for a 10, and there it is. I can't believe I needed 10 to get it to show. The intensity I might want to keep. Go up here. I'll just start moving these two around till I get reasonable illumination. Now it's very important that this is the lowest possible intensity because I'm going to be stacking intensity so that the highest intensity is what will be illuminating the main performer, and then the background crowd will have the next tier of intensity, so it'll be significantly lower, and whatever else is in the deep background, which is specifically this wall light, will be of significantly lower intensity, so it shouldn't be drawing as much attention at all. So right now this feels good. It looks like in order to get it to cover ground, I need a high exposure, and to minimize the intensity, crank down this intensity. So we'll see how it looks when they're all stacked together, and I can edit them a lot better when I have them stacked. So another thing I want is that I want all the lights in the deep background to be warm, and then as we come towards the foreground we have cooler lights, so it'll be like an opposing thing where we have cool lights at the center stage and warm lights in the background. So I'm going to turn on this use color temperature and make sure that I go into the red spectrum. And this is also an easier way to control the color of the lights through the attribute spreadsheet. Number is just a singular integer that you can dial back and forth, and you don't have to go playing with all the actual light color. You just dial this temperature back and forth. All right, so now that I have this wall light, I'm going to see what it looks like whether it's at the right height, catching it in one of these cameras. Let me stop this, render. Let's see if, all right, that's about a good height. And if it's not, it's fairly easy to change. I'm going to select this and I'm going to duplicate it around the wall. So to do that, I'm going to go edit, duplicate special, and I'm going to need a lot of them. I'm going to reset these settings and start with maybe 30. And I want it to rotate around the scene by 7 degrees. 7 degrees is about a good distance of them apart. I like the way that looks. In order to make that work, I do have to make sure I group this light system into a new group so that I can get a pivot at the world. Wall light GRP 01. I can call it world GRP 01. Once I have that, I want to enter 7 degrees in my rotate Y. I'm gonna run a test first to make sure it's working. So I'll do about 5 and I'll go apply. Yeah, that's it. So I need a whole lot of them. We'll go edit, undo. And so it's very clear I'm going to need something in the vicinity of 50 maybe. So I'll go like this and go apply. Yes, 50 is about a good number. Now this one is a little, I can't fit one more in there because it'll look weird. So I'm going to make this one, this very first one I created, I'm going to make some adjustments to it so that it's just a little bit centered so I can fake the distance, just so I can make them all look like they're properly spaced, about the same. All right, let's take a look at what this looks like in the viewport. I'm going to go to shot cam 1. And it looks like I was a little low. So I'm going to select all these and group them. Call this wall lights. Master GRP. And so I'm going to move them up a little so they're all the way up there. Take a look through shot cam 1, see what they're looking like. Yeah, that looks pretty good, but they are very intense. So that's the next thing to modify. And it's a lot of lights. The way I'm going to be able to manage them is through the attribute spreadsheet. So let me go to my default light folder right here, and they're all going to be here. They don't have unique names because they were in a group. So what I'm going to do is pause the video and give them all unique names, and then I'll come back. All right, so I got all of them renamed. Now, before I start troubleshooting in the attribute spreadsheet, one thing I want to do is to make sure that these lights are only interacting with this wall. I don't need them interacting with anything else. So I'm going to select all of them, go to Windows, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and I'll go Light Centric, and I'll access them through here. I'll select all of them and make sure that they are not interacting with anything initially. And let me make sure there's nothing in here that they're going to be. Okay, they're not interacting with anything. I'm going to go into the scene and select my wall. So this should be the only thing that they illuminate. I'm going to start troubleshooting this. So I'm going to go Window, General Editors, Attribute Spreadsheet, and go into the Arnold tab. And this is all the lights that I have selected. And I'm going to start with exposure and start cranking it down. Yeah, so it loses that hot highlight. So an exposure of 12 for now seems to be working. A way to make it look a little bit more professional, because right now it is illuminating part of the shape, and I don't want it to do that. I just want it to be a stream of light that is more offset from the fixture. I don't want the fixture to be illuminated. So I'm going to first stop this render, select all these lights, and move them down just a little bit. So the light selected, I'm going to find my manipulator. Okay, so, yeah. And every single one of them is going to go a little bit down, like that. And then I'm going to find out what it's looking like now. Yeah, so there's a nice little dark shadow there, and then they illuminate everything below that. All right, I'm going to turn back on my background elements so I can actually see what this thing looks like in some of the shot cams. So I'm going to go to my set scene and just turn all these back on. All right, I'm going to go through an actual shot cam to see what it's looking like. So for now, I'm going to leave them like this. When I put in the other lights, I will continue to troubleshoot them, specifically their intensity or exposure. I really should be using, I think it's wise to use an intensity of 1 and only manipulate exposure to control these lights. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to try to do the right thing. Make sure that my intensity is 1 and that I'm controlling through exposure. So I'll go 15, and that's what I'll be doing. So I'm looking through cam 2. I just want to inspect them. So I'm going to crank up my sky dome light just a little bit. I'm going to grab my sky dome light, just increase the exposure a bit, so the scene is just a little illuminated. Alright, so they're in there feeling very soft. That's cool. Just step through and see how they're feeling. This camera goes to 1272. I like this labeling of my cameras with the frame ranges. Really lets me know what's going on. Alright, then for camera 3, just want to make sure that I'm not doing too much clashing with the wrong things. I'm not too worried about how they're illuminated right now. It's just because I turned this on, this really won't be affecting the background. No other lights will be affecting the wall other than the ones intended to affect it. So really lowering this even more will describe better what's going on in that background. But I do have to consider that the truss lights that are intended to illuminate the crowd might get that far and do a little bit of illumination of this. The more I see cam 3, the more I feel like it should be yanked up a bit higher. Yeah, they're pretty low. So what I'm going to try is take the master group. I'm gonna stop this. Take the master group and just move the master group higher in this viewport. So maybe about there. Let's see how it impacts all the other shots. I'm going to move it just a little bit higher so it clears here and we just see the illumination of them here. Don't mind them being there like that. And then for cam 2, yeah, you see their effect, but nothing of them. Not even when she tosses her hands up in the air. And then I have my spin cam B. Okay, they're visible. Spin cam C, they're visible too. Okay, and then camera 4, sorry, camera 3. Yeah, they're nowhere inside, but I want to make sure that their illumination is very evident. And maybe this might be the proper way to go because this is a bit too distracting. Yeah, this might be the proper way to go. Take a look at it a bit. Yeah, it's very subtle and it does point downward. I did forget to pick a material for my lights. So what I'm going to do is do a wildcard selection of all their geometries. So I'm going to select this and paste it here where I'm going to select by name, but I'll put a star in place of the number. And that should select all of them. And I'm gonna right click, assign new material, and assign an AI standard surface shader to them. Call this aiAtmosphereVolume wall light matte, and bring it down. Make sure it's a nice dark color, has a little sheen to it. And then for the wall, I do want to make sure it's the black that I had intended for it to be. I'm going to delete history, freeze transforms on it. I'm going to crank down its value so I really get that black, the darker feel. They feel a lot more distracting when they stop. So it looks like I'm going to have to go in here and push that exposure and potentially lower intensity if they get too aggressive. I found a setting that I was looking for but didn't remember where it was. I usually use it to control how tight or soft a rim light is, and it's the spread value. So you notice this one light here that is extending all the way down. This was the type of reach I was trying to achieve with cranking up the exposure and then compensating with the intensity. This is what I was trying to do. You have to crank the spread down. So I brought it down to 0.150 and it's looking good. And this was the purpose of this, to make the eye kind of look down, right? And this is just acting like a focal point because it's really hot up here and you always keep looking over there. And this is exactly what I wanted. I'm going to take all of them and set them to this 0.15 value. I'll do that in the attribute spreadsheet. So I'll go general, attribute spreadsheet. Under the Arnold tab, I look for spread. I hope it's here. Yes, right there. So 0.15. And that should suffice for now. All right, there's yet another thing that I want to try with these light fixtures. You see, I really like this highlight. The material I applied to them has this nice rough highlight, which really makes them look cool. But I do want them to feel like the type of wall lights that are half cylinder. So like they're more integrated into the wall as opposed to just being a full cylindrical fixture just sitting a few centimeters off the wall. So I'm going to try pushing them in a bit. The way I'll do that is I'll use that wildcard selection again. So every single one of these has a unique name. So I'm going to select them with the star wildcard. And then since that selects the area light tool, I want to leave the area light intact because I like the way it's illuminating the wall. So I just need the geometry to go back. So I'm going to isolate them to start off with. And then I'm going to do a turn off all objects and make it so I can only select geometries and then select all of them. And hit F8 to go into component mode. And select all the components. my W key, make sure I go to object mode, and I'm going to move all of them back so that they're inside the wall a lot more. I'm going to turn on the environment to see, okay, that's too far, so I'm going to like that. It doesn't matter that I leave the light behind, so like that. Okay, so that looks like the type of fixture that's just a half circle. It just makes it integrate into the background better. So let's see what that looks like. I'm gonna render. This is what it was before. If it doesn't work, I'll just let the idea go. So I'm going to hit play. Yeah, it doesn't take away the highlight. I feel like it looks a lot better. These subtle things tend to matter. And if I look at it and decide I want to change that, I'll come back. But I think it looks a lot better. I want to showcase what I'm trying to achieve with this theatrical light system that's going to be illuminating the performer and the crowd. So this is a trailer for Fortnite Festival. And you see this stream of light here, this broken stream of light that is focused on each performer. This is what I'm trying to achieve, right? This one is really good, nice broken up stream. And that's a really good one. Somewhere, that one was really good too. This one right there. So this nice broken up stream of light there. There's one more. It really does a good job. That one right there. The one that's illuminating this chicken right there. So this is kind of what I'm going for. But as I mentioned, for me, everything illuminating the center stage and the crowd is going to be a cool light. And then the wall lights in the background are warm lights. So before I get started, I'm going to minimize the visual clutter because I'm about to do a lot of rigging. So I'm going to minimize this render view temporarily, just so I can start hiding elements. And I'm going to hide as much of the background as possible. I want to keep the center stage active, keep the studio floor here too. I'll hide the background lights and the crowd. Okay, so that should be what I want to see in my scene. I'm to create a layer to put all my cameras on so I can toggle them off. I've decided to make some changes to this light truss. I have this piece that is going to be moving in only one dimension, or can only move one axis, is what I mean to say. If I wanted to move in another axis, I'm going to have to then rotate this base. So let me try to showcase what I'm trying to describe. So you have this part of it. I'm gonna group this center pivot and kind of position it. This part of it, which would be confined to this axis when it moves. And in order to get any additional movement from it, I would then have to include this, group that center pivot, and pivot from this top area and rotate like this. Now that's cool, but it's simply not enough movement. I want something like a 3D camera that can move in all axes. I want to be able to rig this thing like an eye and have a master control for specifically the ones in the center, where I can move all three of them at the same time and move them individually. And in order for that to happen, this single axis rotation thing is not going to work too well. Something more along the lines of this. I found this camera on Amazon. So it's just a 3D camera. I'm not going to model the exact same thing, but I'm going to do something similar to this. What I'm interested in is the shape. And this part of it is going to be a sphere, and that's the part that's going to be moving like an eye. So I'm just going to get started on it so you can see what I'm going for. But that does mean that I'm going to be discarding these. I'm going to get started by creating a copy of a piece of this thing that I still want. And that's the top, the base here. So I'm going to duplicate it and I'm going to move it to the center because I'm going to create a rig that I want to turn into a modular asset and duplicate for everything. So I want to start at the center of the scene. Let me hide these cameras and I will isolate temporarily and go to the top view so I can get this piece into the center of the shot as close as possible. I'll align it to the center pivot. And then I'm going to scale it out a bit to get a square, more of a square shape. So scale it like that because I'm going for a spherical shape. All right, so I'm going to start by creating a polygon cylinder. Move it up. Scale it up. Down. And I'm going to select these faces and go select inverse and delete the insides. I'm going to get this edge and scale it down to get that shape that I saw in the Amazon camera. And I'm going to extrude, push inward, and to make it shorter. And I'm going to create a lip. So I'll extrude this again. Just get that lip. Now to ensure that it catches light properly, not that I'll ever get this close to it, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to intrude one more time to get a little shell. And now I'm going to bevel the edges by adding some edge loops. There. Definitely here. I don't want to get too complicated. I just want the overall shape to come through. Yeah, something like that. All right, and then make sure I push it up into, call it light exterior body. Next thing I'm going to do is create the main part of the light that's going to be swiveling. So I'll go create polygon sphere. And before I move it from world, I want to create a locator. That locator is going to help me find the center part of this sphere later when I need to create a joint that's going to be controlling this. So I'm going to take this locator and put it inside the sphere. So just parent it to it and continue my work. So I'll move this straight up. Scale it. I'm going to need to find that center because I'm going to modify it so much to create the shape that I want. I'm going to select these faces and delete them because this is the opening where the light is going to be. Allow this row to be, and yeah, this is still preserves that some degree of that spherical shape, which makes it look cool. It makes the design look nice. Now I'm going to replicate something like this. I could just duplicate this piece and use it. I don't really need this surface, but I'm going to put it there just in case. The spotlight I'm about to use is going to be inside and it's going to be illuminating, so I don't need this actual surface, but I'll keep it anyway. So I will do an extrusion, extrude the entire lip. Like that, just to create a tangible edge. To this, just to hold shape when I smooth it. And I'm going to duplicate these two pieces, Shift P to get them out, and move them to the center, the top view. Center pivot. And go to the various views and just try to get it to be somewhat straight as I can be. It can be. Top view. Get it in the center. If this thing was going to be seen up close, I would be redoing this at 0 so I get more precision, but it simply isn't. And it's going to be fine as is. Go to the top view again. Actually, go to the bottom. To move it just a little bit to get it centered. And that should be enough to hit 3 on here. And I'm going to keep this for as long as possible. I'll call it the bulb cover. Alright, now I want to take this material, the material that I used to texture this, select it, map it, and apply to these new shapes I created. Okay. So that's our new light system. And the way I intend for it to move would be like this. It would be moving like that, like an eye. I'm not so worried about it clashing with the edge because the light will never be moved that far. Like, it's so high up and it's really going to be focused in the central region. And the ones in the outskirts are not going to be moving at all. All right, so now I'm going to place these in a group. Call this the swivel piece for now. And I'm going to put these inside a group. Call it swivel piece GRP. All right, since I've established this as the group that's going to be doing the swiveling, I want to make sure its pivot is matched to this locator. So I'm going to select it, center pivot first, and then just actually isolate just the locator. And then hold this. Okay, it's already centered, so I'm fine. So this entire group seems to be at the perfect place. If not, I was gonna have to snap the pivot to the locator. Alright, so now it's time to create the spotlight that's going to be playing the role of the theatrical light. First, let me do some organization. I'm going to take this base, get it out of here, and group these pieces together. Call it light fixture base. So I'll call this the light page light GRP. Okay, so I have everything in a group now. And I'm going to go create light spotlight. I'm going to move it straight up, scale it up a bit, rotate it minus 90 degrees, and move it into there. I want it to really encapsulate that opening. So now it's time to hide this shape. And I'm going to run a test to see whether or not I'm going to see a light shape in there. So I'm just going to open my render, go to perspective cam 1 and hit play. All right, I can't see anything now because the exposure is not enough. So I'm going to go to the spotlight, go into the Arnold tab and crank up the exposure to about 13. I want to crank it up some more, maybe like an 18. Yeah, it appears to be being blocked by something. Alright, so it looks like I underestimated how much exposure I needed to get the spotlight to illuminate the stage. This is a really large scene, so this is really far away. I had to crank it up to 20, an exposure of 20. Now I'm going to group this light with the part that swivels because it has to move with it. So I'm going to grab it and put it in this swivel piece group. Right. And then I'm going to go in the render settings. And since this is a theatrical light, I need an atmosphere. I need particles in the air, something that's simulating light interacting with particles. And to do that, I'm going to use aiAtmosphereVolume. So I'm going to add that. And it shouldn't do anything until I set a reasonable density for it. I'm going to set a density of 0.01. Now I should see the light shape. I'm going to copy this tab so I can have access to this node without having to go to the render settings. I'm going to close some of these windows. I have a lot of windows open and I'll minimize it so I can access it later. I'm going to look. Yeah, it's a very thin, it tapers off to a very thin shape. And what I'm going to try to do is fit it into this hollow, moving it just the way I did before. I ended up, let me stop this so I can do it. I ended up moving it down a bit, but really it should be inside about that much. Okay. Yeah, so that it feels like a stream of light emanating from the entire hollow. I might be able to push it in a little bit more. So I'm gonna go about that much, and that should be good. That should suffice for now. Let me continue the processing of this light to turn it into a theatrical light, and I'll be able to analyze better. The next thing I'm going to do is soften its impact on the stage. So I'm going to grab the spotlight and crank down the penumbra angle. I'm going to set it to a negative value to really soften it. I'm going to crank up the drop off, not too high. Get a nice stream of light. And I'm going to have to play with these parameters for the ones on the outskirt. I'll go too far with that drop off. So something like that. All right, that should be good. That feels like a theatrical light. All right, then now I'm going to add light gobos. All right, so that's a filter that's going to break up the light stream. So I'm going to go add, go gobo, add, stop this for now, double click on it and add a noise, a mild noise node to it. Okay, let me see what I have. So if I hit play, that's the broken up light stream. All right, it's time to do some fine tuning of this light stream, and it's more than likely going to change as I progress through this project, especially when it comes to the further down the line when I'm going to be using this to light the finished animated scene with the VFX. But I want to get started with some good initial settings and animation for this that can be modified later. I'm going to first go back to the aiAtmosphere node and try to tone down this atmosphere number, not too much. Do a 005, and then I'm also going to pick a cool color for it for now. Nice cool color like that. Yeah, maybe something like that. We'll more than likely come around and play with it some more. And when it's time to render too, I will have to deal with these sample settings and crank them up. All right, the next thing I'm going to do before I turn this into a modular asset, right, because this entire thing has to be duplicated for all the rest of them, is I'm going to animate this light stream so it's interacting with the atmosphere. So to do that, I'm going to go back into the Gobos node that I added. All right, now go to this noise, and I want to be able to animate it now so that when I duplicate it, they all have some animation, which will then be altered to make each of them look unique. But for now, the two things I'm going to animate are frequency ratio and spottiness, because these two values do the most modification of this noise function. When the noise type is set to below, these two add some nice subtle changes to this noise that will work very well for what I have going on. So I'm going to first open the graph editor and go to animation, graph editor. I'm going to minimize this now. And right now, I don't know what the frequency of the animation should be. I'll just pick a arbitrary frequency, and then I'll be able to manipulate the curve later when I start to settle on a good speed. So I'm going to start by setting a key on frequency ratio. So I'll set a key here, and I'll move to about frame 100, and I will crank it up to about 8. And I'll come over here to about 1 and bring it back to the number it was at. So when I take a look at the graph editor and I select this node, I should have those 2 keyframes. I will flatten the tangents so I have something like this. And I think I should make it a little bit more complicated than this. So I'm going to select this and insert a key and insert another key here. And I'll add a more interesting curve. Make sure the front and the end are the same. So maybe something like this. And I should probably also use a spline tangent for this. Yeah, so that it'll flow into the start properly. But then the next thing to do is to make sure that it cycles infinitely. So I'll go curves, post infinity cycle, and then I'll go view infinity. And this should allow this to animate over time endlessly. But I do have to fix this curve. Looks like it might have to be done manually. And I do have to adjust this one here, just so it's a nice curve. Alright, so I'm going to do the same thing for the spottiness. And as I mentioned before, if I decide that this is either moving too fast or too slow, if it's moving too fast, then I'd be scaling the curve like this so that I have a lower frequency. But if it's moving too slow, then I'll scale down and then I'll have a high frequency. All right, but it's not going to be possible to determine that right now. I'll have to do a test render and see how it's illuminating. I might do one at the end of this lesson, just see what it's behaving like, but for now I'm just going to focus on creating this curve system. Alright, so I'm going to the spottiness now, and I'll do the same thing with spottiness. I'm going to set a key. Spottiness, move to about there, crank up spottiness to a high number, set a key, and I should have access to the graph, access to it in the graph, so I can now insert my own key and bring it down. So I think it has a value of 0.1. I can just check here. Yeah. I won't do too much with this one. I'll just take it, go curves, post infinity cycle, and that should be enough. So between the two of them, I'll have something like this. I could overdrive this value. Yeah. Alright, so something like that. It's now time to create the control system for this thing. I'm going to start with a NURBS circle. And what I'm looking to do is to create something that represents a light icon. I have something in mind, so I'm going to go to the top view. I think I see this a lot with user interfaces. So I'm going to go create curves, and it is an EP curve, but I do need a linear. So I'm going to hold down X and snap this to the grid, hit enter, and then add it to the view. There it goes. So now I'm going to take this, center its pivot, and move it to about there. All right, then now I'm going to group it just temporarily because I want to be able to spin it around here. And I think I need, let me go edit, duplicate special. I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to need 7 copies. Actually, let me edit, reset settings. And I need 7 copies, rotated 45 degrees in the y-axis. So let me save this and go apply. Yeah, something like this. But yeah, this is good, but it's just that they're a little large. So I'm going to take each of them and do like a local scale of each, and also move them in a little bit, or outer, like that, and then go to control vertices and change the shape a bit. All right, I just want an icon that won't clash with my character's global control. All right, so this is something that I'll be able to recognize a lot better as a light. And now it's time to weld it into one shape. So I'm going to grab all of them, Shift P to make sure they're in world, and then freeze all their transforms. And I'm going to select all of them hit the down key to get to their shape nodes, click the main one, and then in my mail command window, I'm going to go parent-r-s, and this should make it all one shape. And then now I'll go to the shape node and I'll pick a color for it. So I'll pick like a yellow light color to represent a light, like that. I think I might have, I can do a global override. I think it's this one. So if I do this, yeah, I only need to pick a color override once. So this is the control system I'm going to be using for these lights. I'll call it light CTRL, just a generic name for now. Right. I'm gonna grab it by, I'm gonna hit F8, make it just a little bit larger, to isolate it. So I can see it a little bit better. It's a little bit more larger. Not like it too big, anything like that. This transform's already frozen. So I'm going to move to the next step. And the next thing to do is create the joint system that I'm going to use with an IK handle to wire to this control. So I'm going to go to the mail command, type in joint, and that should create a joint at world. And I'm going to select that joint, select this locator that was in the center of this part of the light that swivels, and go modify match transforms and match translation. And that should move it to the light. And I'm going to increase its radius. And then I'm going to duplicate it and move it down. Right. I'll make the one down smaller. I'll call this stage light JNT01. Might have to end up renaming all of this. JNT and 01. Then I'll parent this joint and joint to its parent. I just need it so I can create the rotate plane solver. And now I'm going to place this inside my stage light group, and then I'm going to grab my swivel piece group, which is everything that should be moving with this, and I'm going to dump it in under the main joint, so that way the main joint controls the whole light. And then now I'm going to create the IK handle, so I'm going to go to the rigging menu, go to skeleton, go to create IK handle, make sure it's a rotate plane solver, click here and control click there, and that should be the IK handle. And if I was to take the IK handle and move it around, yeah, it controls the light. Yeah. Controls the light as expected. So I'll call this IK handle stage light, and I should have started with a JNT here. The identifier of what it is should be at the beginning. So change these to JNT. And I should be now able to put this IK handle in this group, light group, and make sure it's still functional. Yes. All right. Now I'm going to make sure that I don't get a pop when I connect this IK handle to this control. So I'm going to select the control, select the IK handle, and go match, modify, match transformations, match translation. I could have just done it in one axis, but in the two axes that I needed, but this is fine too. So I'll just now select the light now that I know it's snapped perfectly, and I'll move it down. Select the control and move it down till it's back on the ground, and now I can freeze transforms on it in preparation for a point constraint. So I'm going to grab the light, grab the IK handle, go constraint, point constraint, and I don't want to maintain offset, so if I hit apply, now the control is connected to the IK handle, and I should be able to move the light, right, like an eye. So that's the light rig. Now it's time to duplicate it and position it all across the light truss. This is the kind of functionality I wanted. Let me go to perspective so I can take a look at this thing up close and see how it's behaving as I move. Yeah, that's what I expected, like an eye. Okay, so now I'm going to put this control underneath the light group. Make sure it's still working. Okay, so this is the modular group that I'm going to be duplicating to create the rest. All right, now it's time to create the separate instances of this modular asset. I went through and did a better renaming of everything. I make sure there's an identifier 01 at the end so that when I create the instances, I can very easily do a wildcard selection and give all these elements a new identifier so that each instance can have unique names. I even went through and gave better names to that inner bulb, the IK handle, effector, and everything. So everything is renamed. Here's a copy of the control. I'm going to use it to create a master control for the centralize. But first, I'm going to do this instancing of these lights, creating copies, and make sure that these are functional copies and they all have unique nodes all the way down to the noise and the animation curves I just created. So I'm going to go edit, duplicate special, and I'm going to go edit reset settings. But what I really want is to duplicate the entire input graph. All right, so I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to hit apply. Okay, so if I have done everything correctly, if I were to move this light from its group, everything should move correctly and I should be able to position it anywhere. I'm going to start by, actually I'm going to position in the center first. I'm going to focus on getting these things, and these ones are higher. Now I'll select this control and move it so it's touching the stage better. And I'm going to render to see if everything duplicated correctly. So I should have two streams of light if I hit render. So I'm not seeing the second stream of light, but I think it has something to do with the fact that I still have this geometry on the stage, so maybe it's being blocked. So I'm going to hide. Let me stop this first. I'm going to grab this entire module and hit Control H to hide it. And also to be on the safe side, I'm going to grab all these nodes of the duplicate and go modify, search and replace names, and replace every instance of 01 with 02, just so it has a unique name. And hit apply. All right, now I'm going to try rendering again. Yes, and that's the second stream of light. So it was really being blocked by the module that was right there. So I have to make sure to hide them. So I'm going to duplicate in the same way and rename. I'm going to do one more and then I'll pause and duplicate and position all the rest of them. I want to do one of the ones on the outskirts. That one I don't have to move up and down. And actually with this one, what I'm going to do is if I find the correct height that I want, which is about there to get it right on the stage, I'm going to lock Y because I'm never going to need Y again and I might hide it later. So, but for now I'm just going to lock that attribute so I don't mess around with it. Edit, duplicate special, and go apply. And I'm going to go in, hold down shift, and rename everything. Go modify, search and replace. If I search and replace, I'm going to replace every instance of 1 with 3, apply. Okay, so I was a little confused on how I was going to name these things, and I've decided just to go with starting a count of 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for the ones on the outskirts. So that means this one that I've just duplicated, that's going to be on the outskirts. Instead of giving it a postfix of 3, I'm going to give it a postfix of 4. Let it be the first one on the outskirts. So I'm going to hit apply. So now that's 4. And I should be able to just move it into position. So I'll just move it over here. These ones on the outskirts are going to have significantly different values from the ones on the inside. And they will not move as much, and they will not have a master control either. I'll just be positioned with this controller to point to the crowd. That's that one. I'm going to speed up the duplicating and positioning of everything, and I'll be right back. One thing I'm going to do is I want to keep this one at the source. So I'm going to change its name. It's postfix to source for this one. So I'm going to do a search and replace. I added it to my shelf and then select everything in here and look for every instance of 0, 1 and replace it with source. So now from now on I'm going to be looking for source and I'll go apply. Right. This way the one I just duplicated for the last one in the center can be 1. So it's fine here, and I can just call this 1. All right, there's only one more left to do, and I came back because I wanted to show you how I was able to get them around the stage a little bit more easily. So what I do is I do a duplicate special, correct way with input graph. And now that I have a piece and I want to get it to location, all I have to do is group that so that I get a pivot at center, and I'm able to move it into location. Okay. And then I can take it out of the group now because I just needed that group so I could have a pivot at center. And then I can go through and rename everything, search and replace. Fine. Now that they're all duplicated, one thing that I should have done was do a little bit more checking. I'm going to hide the source. So all of these, the spotlight should have a unique node, a unique Gobos node, and I think that is the case because it is putting a number at the end here. But to be safe, I'm going to come in here and start mapping out this light, maybe 2 of them, just to ensure that it has unique nodes, and I'm pretty sure it does. Yeah, it has unique nodes, unique Gobos, and therefore means it has unique nodes, yeah, for each and every one of them. So I should probably come in here and rename these better later, and I'll do that further down the line. So this is it. Before I move on to positioning these things, seeing how they look and fine tuning them, there's one more thing I do have to do, and that's create a master control. I'm going to hide this last one, Control H. So all the originals should be off the stage. Go to 6 shaded mode for this view. And I'm going to take this and turn it into a master controller. I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to make some modifications to it, its shape. I'm going to go, I just want it to be slightly different from these smaller ones. So I want to delete, I'm going to delete some of the shapes. I'm going to go display shapes. I'm going to come in here and select every other one. There. And then I'm going to delete it. Make sure to go back to display, turn off shapes, and hide this. And so this would be the master controller. And I'm going to isolate it. I'm going to control vertices and scale it up. It looks pretty messy, so I'm going to make some more changes to it. I'm going to select these and sort of tone down the look. It's a little too messy. Let me see if I can, I just don't want it to be a visual eyesore. So I'm going to try to make it look acceptable. That should be fine. Go to control vertices. Maybe I should make it a lot smaller, like that. And then I'm going to change its color so that I can more easily identify the red should be good. And then go down to the shape, make sure I disable that. Yeah, so red should work fine. And then I'm going to go into each and every one of these, the internal ones, frame the actual control. I'm going to put a group over it, call it master CTRL GRP 2, and make sure the control still functions. It's fine. And I'll do the same thing to those guys. This will be 01. And that one will be 03. Alright, so now that I have these master controls, I'm going to select each and every one of these master groups, these intermediary groups. Let's start there, go control, constraint, parent constraint, and I will be maintaining offset and hit, let me say first, hit apply, and I should now have control over that and to still be able to control it by itself. And then this is the master. That's the way I'm going to be able to track the character with all 3 of these lights through this, but yet still have control over each individual light. So I'm going to go through and constrain the rest of them. So I'm going to go click on the master, click on the group, hit apply, and do the same thing here. Click on the master, click on the group and hit apply. That should be it. And now this master control controls all three of these lights at the center, and I can move them individually. I'll do a quick test like this. Move this. Okay, so it all works. Alright, and I think that should be it for the rigging of these lights. And make sure I've locked all the y-axes of this controller, because the y-axes really will never have to be moved again. And I could probably do that with these two. I don't need translate y. I'm going to lock it. And I definitely don't need rotation and scale for any of them. So just to clean up the view, I'm going to lock and hide rotation and scale. So lock and hide. And I'll do the same thing for the master. I'll lock and hide. Selected. And lock this temporarily. Actually lock this permanently, but I might need to unlock it to make some changes. I might find that this thing is in the way and I need to move it out. So I would need access to that. Alright, so time to fine tune these lights to the environment. Alright, so I did a 400 frame render to test out the animation on the noise node, and this is what I'm getting. So it starts off really nice. It does this really weird thing, which might be cool too, but I don't think so. I think it'll be too flickery. But most important thing to point out is that it's going a little too fast. Right? I want them to be a lot slower. I don't want them to be moving this much. And their intensities also need to be altered. But one of the first things I'm going to do is reduce the frequency of those animated keys. So I'll just stretch it across the timeline. I'm going to start by getting the crowd lights right. So I'm going to hide the three central lights that are going to be illuminating the character. These ones right here. I'm just gonna go Control H and hit play. And judging from the cone angle of these crowd lights, I can tell that it's not going to be enough. I'm going to have to widen the cone angle to really get the entire crowd. So I'm going to be doing some adjustments of the cone angle. And I also know that I want to reduce the intensity. So I'm taking these controls and I'm moving them so that the lights are pointing into the crowd. Right now I want to look through some of these cameras just to see the way things are looking like. I restarted the program so I could get a refresh because the renderer was misbehaving. So this is cam 1. This is what one of these lights is looking like. I'm going to increase the cone angle from here, from this perspective camera, or I'll choose perspective 1. Start adjusting this cone angle from here. So I'll start with this one. One thing I could do is duplicate this light and have as many lights as I need for each fixture, but I think it's a better idea to increase the cone angle because there's a lot to illuminate here, and there's no point in adding another light. It is an expense that's not needed. So I'll come over here, select this light, and start increasing my cone angle. And for now, it's working pretty fine. And that's pretty large. That's a large cone angle. And I'm pretty sure it's being blocked by the geometry at this point. So I'm going to start moving it down and and see if it's going to increase the cone in the render as I move it down. Yes, it is. It increases the range. So I'm going to look at that value. So a cone angle of roughly 107 degrees. I'll make it 108. And a translate of 653. Let's see what this one is. Yeah, so I'm going to move all of them to about that number. I'll just paste that number, 653, just to get them out. Let's stop this render for now. 653. And then I'm just going to select these lights. Go Window, General Editors, Attribute Spreadsheet, and this would not be an Arnold. Looking for cone angle right there. And I'll go for 108 for all of them, like this. And see what we're working with. Okay, so that's a lot of illumination. Gets the crowd pretty good, but it is pretty intense. For now, I use the intensity to be able to really gauge the range. I might end up creating that duplicate I was talking about, because it does look like some things are not going to be in range, and I do need to find a way to make sure the majority of the background is illuminated. So I'm going to start stepping through these cameras. So look through cam 1. So that's pretty interesting. Portion of the crowd is illuminated. That might not be a bad thing. It looks kind of cool. Contrast, that looks really cool. But we do have banners here that do need to be illuminated properly, and I'm wondering if they should have some. It might not be a bad idea to install some lights over here that highlight the banner. I'm going to pause the video and render various sections and then come back so I can talk about what I'm going to do with these crowd lights. If I'm going to end up duplicating more, maybe that's another thing to do, to just duplicate more and rotate them around to fill in these spots here, so the whole crowd can be illuminated by them, or I can add a different type of light to get some of these areas. I think that might be a great idea. And towards the end of this lesson, I'm going to fine-tune these materials for these banners because they're not perfect. I have to plug in roughness and play around with them so they look more like fabric. But I'm going to do a few renders and come back and decide how to move forward. Alright, so one of the first alterations I want to make was the intensity of this thing, because I knew from the very start that I'm not going to go with this intensity for the crowd lights, but this is what it's feeling like. It's not a bad composition. They all feel really nice, but it was really intense, so I reduced the density of the fall to 0.2. 0.3. I actually did 0.25 and it rounded up. So because this is drowning out a lot of the banner data here specifically, so I decided to reduce it. And the background is still supposed to have the background still has to have a lower value so that the stage lights for the main character can take center stage. So even these wall lights that I started with, I know they're definitely going to have to come down a little because they're a little strong, and there's not a clear breakdown of what's deep background and background as far as value is concerned. So I will definitely be reducing this intensity so that this can be more of a unified contrast with what's around it. But here, definitely for starters, I brought it down to 0.3. So I'm going to keep stepping through and rendering, and I'll be back with more results. All right, so I've started to make some lighting choices based on my staging choice, based on my staging cameras. And that's basically how I'm going to go through and fix what's wrong. Only thing that matters is what's in my staging cams, and I have to make sure that all the lighting that I'm doing is helping to create a successful composition that highlights the character. Now, some of the changes I'm making here might be changed again when I turn on these central lights that illuminate the character. But for now, I did like I said and reduced the exposure of the wall lights. So I reduced the exposure of the wall lights here, and what you're seeing me do here is now fake some illumination that brings the eye down, so it keeps the top part of the banner here darker, and it also does that on this banner, this hanging banner on the portable stage. And the way I did that is with two area lights. So it's an area light that's sitting right in front of the banner and faking some illumination, just helping it to stand out a lot more. And there's another one also here on this one. And as I continue to step through, I'll get it done for the other ones. But the objective is to make sure I'm getting something that looks cool, right? Something that looks really nice. It's not final. I might change it when the stage lights come in, but I'm gonna keep stepping through the cameras and making changes like this. And whenever they're really big, I'll come back and talk about what changes were made. All right, so this is one of my spin cameras, the camera that shows the character spinning as the mesh network is surrounding them. And it's showing me that I'm going to have to take a lot more charge of what is happening with this wall. So I really need for things to get darker as the eye travels up the wall. So I'm going to cheat that effect with a gradient map. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to stop this and I'm going to take this wall and UV it. So I'll go to the UV editor, I'll go Windows, General Editors, Modeling, UV editor. And that's what I have. So to make things easier, I'll isolate this. I'll do this again, UV cylindrical. There's supposed to be a widget somewhere here. There it is. So I'm going to make sure it encapsulates the entire cylinder. And that gives me this UV shell, which I'm going to flip. Go to the transform menu and flip it in the U. Make sure that the vertices up top represent the vertices at the top, so that's fine. I'm going to take this UV shell, make sure it's within the UVs. And then I'm going to take its material, select its material, go to the shading, the hypershade, and map out the material. Looks like I lost it, so I'll do this again. Select its material, map it, and I'm looking to put, let me search for it through here, make sure I get the right one. Yeah, it's just a basic ramp. I'm going to wire that into the base color. Move things around. Make sure that I'm not using a pure color of black or white for either side, and just get like a nice gradation. I'm going to copy this tab so I have access to it. And I'm going to store this result and render. I'm going to take this darker. First, I'm actually going to try to find that exact point. Yeah, there it is. So it's right up there, and I want it to be lower, so I'm going to try to bring that separation point about there. That's a good distance. actually gonna add another swatch and make it really dark. Yeah, so for now I'm going to leave it right now as is. I'm gonna call it ramp studio wall. So my crowd of spectators is becoming very difficult to work with because they're individual pieces and operations have to be run on each and every individual piece. So sometimes it's just stalling for minutes on end. Since I'm very close to losing this proxy crowd and they're pretty much arranged the way I want, I'm going to merge them into one mesh. I'm going to duplicate the crowd. They're expensive. And I'll hide this for now. And I'll just take this and go combine. So that should make them one mesh. And there was really no point in duplicating them. I should be able to just delete this. I'm going to take them, delete history on them, and freeze transforms. And I'll just delete these two files, these two folders. There's no need to keep them, they'll just swell the file size. Alright, so now that I have my crowd as a single piece of geometry, I'm going to select all my lights, and some apparent reason I also have a wall light 28 and apparently 21 that don't get selected. I don't know why. So I'm going to select them from here. They don't list over here. Maybe this can no longer list anymore. Lights. I'm going to go to Windows, Relationship Editors, Light Linking, Light Centric. And with the light selected, I'll also shift select my crowd, and I'll go list, manual load, and list, manual load, and it should select my crowd. And I should be able to select all these lights. Okay, they all appear to be connected to it. Well, not all of them. 28 and more than likely 21. Alright, so yeah, it's fine now. Very fast feedback too. I'm going to see what it looks like when the wall lights are illuminating. Should be able to hit play now and have access to them. They were hidden for some reason. Yeah, it's just really slight. I can see some yellow light, a little bit of it on those in the farthest back, and that might be enough. But as I scrub through, if it becomes very necessary, I will use an area light to fake this illumination in the back. But I don't think it's necessary for now. I don't want them to stand out too much, so even if I do it, it might be really light. So I'm going to go back to troubleshooting this thing, and I'll come back and discuss some of my changes. I'm going to try to come back when it's all done. There's about 2 more things that I want to do to close out this lesson, which is fine-tune these materials and shade the crowd a color that matches the banners they're standing next to. And that should close out the lesson and finish the lighting for now until it's time to revisit all this stuff. One thing I also haven't done, which I should probably do right now, is the extension of the keyed attributes of the noise. I have to select all my noise nodes. So the easiest way to get to them is to select my lights, go to my hypershade, map all of them, and that should give me access to all these noise nodes. I don't think I have to do this. I think just selecting these lights would have given me access to them in the graph editor. Let me test that to make sure. No, it looks like I do have to select all these noise nodes. Okay. So with all the noise nodes selected, it's time to extend these keys so that the animation isn't so snappy. It's just happening in a very short time. I guess this was a bad frequency to pick. So I'm going to activate the scale tool and scale this. So I'm going to scale it about that much. I just need a really subtle movement in the streams of light just to show that it's interacting with the particles in the air. Alright, so I managed to get one of those area light to the banner on the other side. I don't think that this one is going to need any of that illumination with an area light because it's being illuminated directly by these outer lights here for the crowd. Now I still haven't decided whether or not I'm going to duplicate another copy of this and slide it over so that I can get illumination on these other guys, because I kind of like this light to dark transition thing, but I might change my mind. But one thing I do want to do is I acknowledge that this light here is not, it's a light that really should be in the background. And right now it's pretty high contrast. Right now, one of the things I want to do with it is reduce the contrast of the noise that's controlling it. I'm going to pick that light that is the one that's here. I'm going to play with it to decide what that contrast value is going to be. So I'm going to go into its noise and I'm going to crank up the threshold, because cranking up the threshold, yes, should minimize the streaks. Pretty much reduces the contrast of it. So it becomes one more of a unified mass. And I think this is a not so bad value. So I'll stick with that threshold of 0.255 for now. In order to get all of them done at the same time, I'm going to use the attribute spreadsheet. So this is once again using the hypershade. I'll select all the noise nodes and go window, general editors, attribute spreadsheet, and set the threshold to 0.25478. All of them. There's 3 that I should leave alone, and that's, I'm going to have I need to label these noises, so I'm going to label them so that they have the correct naming convention and are matched to the correct light number, so I know not to play with the 3 that illuminate our character. Those have to go back to their value of 0 for now. I haven't gotten to troubleshooting them yet, so I want to leave things as is. This is as far as I'm willing to take the processing of these lights. I made a few changes. These are some screen grabs. One of the changes I made was I moved these flyers down. As you can see over here, this produces a tangent-like effect. When the bottom of the flyers, the shadow is visible like that. So I just moved them down. I did the same thing for the other side. And also the area light, its termination point was visible, so I angled it down. There's some other shots. I'm liking this this light to dark transitions. I just want it to be low contrast, but to determine how much I need to reduce this contrast, I want to see what the primary lights are doing, how they're going to look and how they're going to mix with what I've done here. But it looks really cool, and it breaks up the background a bit. The lights, I have to shove them more into the fixture because they're producing this sharp edge, which means it's just not interacting with the fixture. So I move them in, and I should have an example. Yeah, shoved it in, and now it's being cut off by the actual fixture. So that's a good thing. And they're really in there, so it's really weird that it's not being impacted by the geometry, but apparently that's how far it has to be in there for it to work. Another thing I did was reduce the fog density to 0.002 from 0.003. It might still be too much, but I'll wait to determine that when the primary lights are in position. One thing I want to do right now before I proceed is change the roughness value of these banners, because they have these highlights and it's not cloth-like at all, or not the type of cloth that you would typically see with these banners. So I'm going to go to the materials and very quickly crank down the roughness value. I'm going to delete history on this so I can get to the material fast. And I'm going to crank up the roughness. Take this region. Yeah, so the roughness is going to go higher until it's diffused. About that much. That looks really good. So it's a roughness of 0.551. I'll do the same to the other side. Look to my perspective 1 camera. And set it to 0.551. It's a value I can trust. And before I move on, I'm going to show something I did to really unify the wall. This gradient now, I made sure that the brightest color at the bottom is very close to the color of the light. So I sampled the light and I got this color, and it's unifying more at the lower half. You can see, so it'll go from the really dark and then it comes to this warmer tone below. So before I move on to dealing with the main lights and wrapping up the lesson, I want to do something to this crowd to make them blend in more with their background. What I'm going to do is first isolate them. I'm going to UV them with a cylindrical UV, and I'll seal it off. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want them on a horizontal UV path. So if I go to my UV editor, it should be like that. So this is a fake crowd, but I just want to shade them the way I intend on shading the robot spectators. They will have a lot more variation. They'll be properly textured with a lot of variations. The alembic file that comes in is going to have a lot of properties that allow the various sections of the crowd to look like they're part of a set or they're part of a group, and that's what I'm going to try to simulate here. With this thing laid out like this, I'm going to find the material for the proxy crowd right there, and I'm going to select it, go into the hypershade, and I'm going to wire another ramp shader. I always never know which one I should be using. I'm going to take this ramp shader, and I'm going to wire the out color in there. And what I'm looking to do is I first need to find the correct direction. So I think, yeah, like that. So I want a U ramp, and I want 4 swatches because I want to scatter 4 different colors for the 4 different quadrants. So I'm going to bring this down. Okay, and that's telling me where. I'm make sure. Okay, I could use none for now. And the quadrants are going to be based on which section you're in. So I'm going to try to dial this color in. Okay. It appears to be as far as it's going to go. All right, and I'm going to start with this one, and I'm going to start by sampling the background color. There, just so they have the color that represents their background. And move on to the next quadrant, and this is the blue quadrant, so I'm going to sample this value, okay. And then I'll move on to this quadrant. Appears to need another color swatch. So I'm going to put another color swatch there. For now, I'll set it to white. And put just a little bit like that. And I'll try to pick a color somewhere in here. This is a little too vibrant, so I will reduce the saturation a bit. And for this last quadrant here, this gray one is supposed to be this green value, and this last one should be that. So this is just another attempt to further unify the background elements with the crowd standing right next to them. So I'm gonna pause the video and do a few renders to see how this looks, and I'll come back and just close out the lesson and do these central lights. Actually, one thing I do want to do is I want to try to see if I can use some type of interpolation. Yeah, and I think it looks good as they transition like that. But I do have to be careful here. Make sure that these colors are in the right quadrant. Yeah, this one. Yeah, so camera 3 is the best camera to inspect it, and it looks pretty cool. As a transition from section to section, the crowd, I think it's gonna work really well. Right now it's just a hint of what it could potentially do for the background in terms of value, but it'll look really cool when it's time. Yeah, and as you transition, you start to see the color matching the background a lot better. This is some really cool stuff. And then I'll deal with that later, but that transition there is, let me deal with that now. That transition is not, come over here, go to the ramp, and it's between this green one and that. Basically how this green transitions there. Yeah, so that's a little better. Alright, that's it. Time to move on to the main lights. Alright, I'm going to turn on the center stage lights. Press Shift H and hit play just to see what they look like. And I'm also going to turn on my mannequin. Start with camera 1. I don't want to focus too much on the animation here, but around here, make sure that they're pointing at our focal point. So if I was to move all these lights on here so that they'd all be focused on the main character, and hit play. They're not as intense as they should be. The cone angle should be significantly larger. I think that's the first thing I'm going to modify, your cone angle. Window, general editors, attribute spreadsheet, and change the cone angle to something larger, maybe 80. That's pretty large. Try maybe 50. But it's becoming very clear to me that the crowd lights might need to be warmed to, so that the only cool lighting is what's illuminating the main character. Because the way it looks right now, it looks like you can't really tell the difference. You can't really tell that there's depth. It doesn't add any depth to the scene when they're both the same. Let me do a few renders and I'll be back. And if they're just blending into the crowd lights, then the crowd lights will be made warm. As I'm testing the main lights, I always make sure to use the global control to get the lights to the character. Right? When it's time for the animation, I'm considering actually just constraining this global light control to the character's global control, and that way I can control the individual lights and I can know that the master control is always following the character. So I ended up going with warm lights for the crowd light, and it is really going to help these stage lights stand out and make the character a focal point. Initially I was sticking with my density of 0.002, but things are starting to look really foggy. It looks like when it comes to that density value, you really have to go really low to get something more realistic. So all of this is 0.002. I like the warm and cold contrasting thing going on here. All this was 0.02. And the background is really muted out all through here, and then around here I reduce it to 0.01, and things are looking a lot clearer and doesn't look so foggy. I am definitely going to split the deep background into its own file, so I'm going to alter my production pipeline to show the character animation file, the background, or what I would call the middle ground, and then the deep background, so wall and everything on it. So I will be splitting those up, and I will also be using a depth of field for my renders. And when I go into After Effects, I will be doing things to make sure I'm further helping the eye to differentiate between the foreground, middle ground, and background. And these are some more renders of Camp 3, Latrice's performance, with 0.001 density. So I think this is where I'm going to stop with the processing of this background. I'm going to wait till I have my clothing, the character animation, and the VFX to come back and revisit this scene and its lighting. I want to be able to see the character in this environment before I do any further tweaks. Right now, this mannequin is doing a good job of giving me an approximation, but I still need to see the character in the shot. This is what's left of the rest of the test renders. I like the way this ground is working, and I like that there's a sort of a detail contrast as you step backward. And yeah, it looks okay right now, but definitely not final. So I'm looking forward to taking it to finish. In the next lesson, I'll start rigging the robot spectators. So I might be able to rig all of them in one lesson. I'm going to be using human IK for this. It's going to be a very interesting lesson because I'll show some really cool human IK tricks. And in the next couple of lessons, I will be animating them with their idols and then bringing them into the background file in Alembic format and scattering them and adding some additional elements. Some of them will be holding cameras. It's a very comprehensive process. I have a very cool plan about how to make sure it's a really randomized crowd with everybody doing unique things. Some of the crowd members are going to have real DSLR cameras and video recorders, and some of them are going to be holding phones, and later on I will be using a glare effect or a lens flare effect on some of those phones to show the camera light, since it's very clear that this scene is going to be a little dark. And another thing is that with this scene, there's going to be some really unique camera animation around here. It's going to be a really dark scene and it just illuminates. So there is still a lot of camera animation that needs to be done. I'll also reserve the fine tuning of the noise animation that controls the God light or this theatrical light for after the animation. I'll see you guys in the next lesson where I start rigging the robot spectators.